My son called me from the hospital and told me he was dying. He needed a kidney. He had been on dialysis for 14 months, and his body was failing faster than the transplant list was moving, and the doctors had run out of things to try. He was 41 years old. He had 2 children. He called me on a Tuesday evening, and his voice was the voice of a man who had already begun preparing himself for a specific outcome. "Mom," he said, "I need you to get tested." I was already writing down the name of the hospital before he finished the sentence. The test came back positive. I was a match. I never hesitated. Not for 1 second. Not one. I want you to understand that. Because what comes next is going to make you ask how I could have loved a man who did what he did to me. And the answer is completely. I loved Daniel completely, the way mothers love their children, without condition, without audit, without measuring what I was owed in return. That was not my weakness. That was my love. What he thought about that love when they wheeled me into that operating room, that is what broke me. 8 days after I donated my left kidney to my son, while I was still in a hospital bed with drains in my side and pain that made breathing feel like work, my neighbor Agnes walked into my room and told me someone had put an estate sale sign outside my house. There was a moving truck in the driveway. The house had already been sold. I was alive. My son had bet that I wouldn't be, and he had lost that bet. And now I was awake, and my house was gone, and he had to figure out how to look me in the eye. Let me tell you about the house. Joseph and I bought it in 1987. It was not a grand house. 3 bedrooms on a quiet street in Millbrook. A kitchen that faced east so the morning light came in strong. A garden in the back that Joseph started the summer we moved in. Tomatoes, squash, herbs along the fence. He had a patient, particular way of working the soil. He would be out there on weekend mornings before I was awake, kneeling in the dirt in an old shirt, talking to the plants the way some people talk to themselves. I used to watch him from the kitchen window while the coffee brewed. He died of a heart attack in 2003. Sudden. Complete. The specific cruelty of a death that gives you no time to say the things you should have said long before. He left me with the house, a mortgage that had 11 years left on it, and the understanding that the only way through grief is through it. You cannot go around. I went through. I worked those 11 years alone. I cleaned office buildings 3 nights a week. I took in alterations on the side. I had learned to sew for my mother, and I was good at it. I paid that mortgage every month without missing one. The final payment was September 14th, 2014. I sat at the kitchen table with the confirmation letter in my hand. Joseph's garden was still in the back, less tended than when he kept it, but still there. The herbs along the fence. 2 tomato plants every summer. I thought, this is mine, fully and completely mine. The last thing we built together, and it is paid for. That house was not a luxury. It was the specific, solid fact of 30 years made permanent. It was the place where Joseph had lived and where I had survived his leaving. It was the only thing in my life that had no debt attached to it. Not financial, not emotional, just mine. And my son sold it while I was on an operating table because he did not believe I was coming back. Daniel was not always this person. I need you to know that before we go further, because the easiest version of this story makes him a villain from the beginning. A cold man who saw his mother as a resource. He was not that man. He was a good boy, gentle in a way that surprised people. He helped neighbors without being asked. He was patient with his father's slow way of explaining things. When Joseph died, he was the one who held me together. Quietly, without drama, making sure I ate and slept and did not disappear into the grief. He was 41 years old and his kidneys were failing and he called his mother. That part was real too. The person who sold my house was not the Daniel who held me together after Joseph died. The person who sold my house was a Daniel who had spent 3 years burying a failing business under debt he couldn't service, and who, when the doctors told him my surgery carried risks at my age, when they said the words, complications, and significant procedure, and we cannot guarantee, made a calculation. He decided I was not going to make it. And then he decided that if I wasn't going to make it, the house was going to be empty, and the debt was not going to wait, and no one would ever have to know. That is the thing that kept me awake at night for a long time after. Not that he was afraid. Not that he was in debt. People get afraid. People make terrible decisions when they are drowning. What kept me awake was this. He made that decision while I was being opened up to give him a piece of my body. He sat with my surgery prognosis in one hand and my power of attorney in the other, and he chose. The power of attorney was from 2009. I had signed it when I had a minor procedure that year. Nothing serious, but I was going under general anesthesia, and my lawyer had suggested it was prudent to have someone authorized to make decisions if something went wrong. Daniel was the obvious choice, my closest child, the one I trusted most. The document was limited. It covered medical decisions and immediate financial matters in the event I was incapacitated. It did not, in any interpretation that held up to scrutiny, authorize the sale of real property. But Daniel had found a buyer. He had found a notary. He had found a title company that was either careless or incurious. And he completed the transaction in 8 days, while I was in the hospital, before I was supposed to wake up. The sale price was $212,000. The house had been assessed the previous year at $247,000. He had not even gotten full value, because he was moving fast. Because he thought he had a narrow window before I either woke up or didn't, and he needed it done before either outcome arrived. He needed it done before I could stop him. Or before he had to face that I hadn't. I did not know any of this when Agnes walked into my room. I was 8 days post-surgery. I was in pain in the specific, deep way that follows internal surgery. Not sharp, but constant. A heaviness in my left side that made every movement a negotiation. I had a drain still in. I could not sit fully upright without help. Agnes had been my neighbor for 19 years. She was 73 years old, small, practical, and constitutionally incapable of softening news. She walked into that hospital room with her coat still buttoned and looked at me in the bed. Teresa, something is happening at your house and I need you to tell me it's planned. I looked at her. What kind of something? There is a sign in the yard. Estate sale. There is a truck. Men are carrying things out. I did not understand her for a moment. The morphine was still close. My thinking was slow, and I was still in the body of a woman who had come through major surgery, and I heard her words, and they did not arrange themselves into sense. Agnes, I said, that is not possible. I know it's not possible. That is why I am here. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Mom, he said, and something in his voice told me everything before he said another word. The tone of a man who has been waiting for a call he did not believe was coming, because he had not expected to receive it. He had not expected me to be alive to make it. What is happening at my house? I said. The silence before his answer was its own kind of answer. Mom, I need you to stay calm. Daniel, I said, what did you do? He came to the hospital. I want to give him that. He did not hide. He did not send a lawyer or a text or a silence. He came to the hospital that same afternoon and he sat in the chair beside my bed and he told me the truth. Every word of it. The business had been failing for 3 years. He had taken loans he could not service. His wife Priscilla did not know the full extent of it. The dialysis had consumed his income. The debt was real, and the creditors were not patient, and he had been carrying it alone in the specific, exhausting way of a man who cannot bring himself to say out loud how far he has sunk. And then the doctors had sat him down and explained the surgery, explained my age, explained the risks, used words like statistically and at her stage, and we do everything we can. And he had heard those words and gone home and sat in his car in his own driveway and done the math. He had decided I would not survive. Not with cruelty. With the panicked certainty of a man looking for a door and choosing to believe the one he needed was open. I told myself you weren't going to make it, he said. He was not crying. He was past crying. He was in the specific stillness of a man who has arrived at the full truth of what he did and has no shelter left from it. I told myself the house was going to be empty anyway, that nobody would be hurt because you wouldn't. He stopped. Because I wouldn't be here to know, I said. He looked at his hands. You planned it around my death, I said. You sold my house because you decided I was going to die on that table. He didn't answer, and then I didn't. The room was completely quiet, and then I didn't. I said again, not as accusation, as the plain, extraordinary fact it was. I survived your surgery. I gave you a kidney, and I came back from it, and the house was already gone. Mom, I need you to leave, I said. His voice when I told him to leave. I will carry that sound for a long time. Not because it moved me from what I was going to do. Because it is the sound of a son discovering in one moment every dimension of what he had done and what it meant that his mother was still there to hear it. He had planned around my death. That was the truth that sat at the bottom of everything. Not greed in the ordinary sense. He had not done it while I was healthy and simply wanted money. He had done it in the precise window he believed would exist between my surgery and my funeral. He had grieved me preemptively and made financial decisions in that grief, and then I had woken up and walked into the middle of them. I could not unknow that about my son. I let him leave. Then I asked the nurse for my phone, and I called Renata, my daughter-in-law's cousin, who was a paralegal. I asked her for the name of the best real estate and elder law attorney she knew. She gave me a name: Gloria Mensah. Gloria Mensah was 54 years old, sharp in the way of a woman who has spent 3 decades watching people underestimate her and had built a formidable practice on the proceeds of those mistakes. She came to the hospital 2 days later, sat in the same chair Daniel had sat in, put a legal pad on her knee, and looked at me with the particular attention of someone who does not waste a minute. I told her everything. When I finished, she read the power of attorney document without rushing. When she was done, she set it flat on her legal pad and tapped it once. "This document does not authorize the sale of real property," she said. "A limited POA for medical decisions and immediate financial matters does not extend to real estate transactions. For a house sale to be valid under POA, the document must explicitly name real property. This one does not. Then what he did was not authorized." She paused. "And Teresa, the fact that he executed this transaction during your surgery in an 8-day window while you were incapacitated, that speaks to intent. That speaks to someone who was not confused about the scope of the document. That speaks to someone who believed the transaction would not be discovered. Because he thought I would be dead. I said it out loud. I wanted to hear what it sounded like in front of a witness. Because he thought I would be dead." Gloria looked at me steadily. "That is what the evidence suggests," she said. "Can the sale be reversed? It can be challenged. Whether it is reversed depends on the buyer, the money, and how fast we move." She clicked her pen. "I need you to understand what filing means. Your son committed fraud. He used a legal instrument outside its authorized scope to sell property he had no right to sell. If you pursue this, it goes to court. He is named as a defendant. His intent, including the timing, including what he believed about your prognosis, becomes part of the record. I looked out the hospital window at the February sky. He planned this around my death," I said. "I want everything you just said in front of a judge. Then we file," she said. Gloria moved fast. Within the week, she had filed an emergency motion to freeze the sale proceeds. She sent a formal challenge to the title company, which had failed entirely to verify the scope of the POA before processing the transaction. The buyer, a property investment company, was notified that the title was in dispute and the sale was being challenged on grounds of fraud. She also filed a civil complaint against Daniel: fraud, abuse of power of attorney, conversion of real property. Daniel's attorney called within days. Gloria told me afterward that the call had been brief. His attorney had tried to frame Daniel's actions as a response to genuine grief, as a desperate decision made under emotional duress by a man who believed he was about to lose his mother. Gloria had said, "Your client executed a real estate transaction using an instrument he knew was not authorized for that purpose, in a window he believed would be undetected because the grantor of that instrument would be deceased. We look forward to explaining that to the judge." The call was brief after that, too. Priscilla called me the second week. She did not know. She needed me to know she had not known. Her voice was the voice of a woman discovering who the person she had married was capable of being, and what that discovery did to the architecture of everything she thought was solid. "I believe you," I said. "Teresa, if there is anything, tell Daniel," I said, "that I am not going to stop." She was quiet. "He thought you weren't going to wake up," she said, barely above a whisper. He had convinced himself. He came home after the surgery consultation, and he sat at the kitchen table all night, and in the morning he said he didn't think you were going to make it. I thought he was just frightened. I didn't know he was. She stopped. "Planning around it?" I said. "Yes." We were both quiet for a moment with the weight of that. "He loves you," she said. "I know that doesn't." "I know he does," I said. "That is the part that is the hardest to hold. I want to tell you about those months. I was staying with Agnes in her guest room because I could not go home, not because the house was inaccessible, but because I was not ready. Agnes had offered without being asked, and I had accepted without false pride. I recovered slowly. My left side reminded me constantly of what it had given. Some mornings I would stand at Agnes's kitchen window with my coffee and look at her small backyard. Nothing like mine, no garden, just a patch of grass and a bird feeder, and think about my tomato plants. Whether anyone was watering them, whether the herbs along the fence had made it through the winter. I thought about Joseph. I thought about him often during those months. Not with grief exactly. Grief for Joseph had passed through its acute phases long ago. Something quieter. I thought about what he would say about all of it. He had been a patient man, but not a passive one. He had believed in doing things properly and completely and not leaving problems for later. Do it right the first time, he used to say, and you only have to do it once. I thought about Daniel making his calculations in the dark of his kitchen while I was in a hospital being opened up for him. I thought about what it meant to love someone who had done that. I thought about it for a long time and arrived, eventually, at something I did not expect. It did not stop being love. It became a different shape of love. Harder, more honest, less willing to be taken for granted. But it did not stop. My deposition was given from Agnes's kitchen table. I sat across from a court reporter and answered every question with Gloria beside me. Daniel's attorney tried several angles. The grief angle. Daniel had been in an abnormal state of emotional distress. The misunderstanding angle. He had genuinely believed the POA covered the transaction. The good faith angle. He had intended to explain everything once the estate was settled. Gloria dismantled each one methodically, the way you dismantle something you have been preparing to dismantle for months. The timing dismantled them too. Because the timing was the thing that no framing could fully survive. A son who panics and makes a bad decision out of grief does not complete a real estate transaction in 8 days while his mother is still in the hospital. A son who genuinely misunderstood his legal authority does not move that fast, that quietly, with a buyer already in place. A son who believed his mother was going to die moves that fast. Daniel gave his deposition and, Gloria told me afterward, answered every question honestly. No evasion, no deflection. He had admitted the timing. He had admitted his belief about my prognosis. He had admitted that he had not expected the sale to be discovered because he had not expected me to be there to discover it. Why did you do it? His own attorney had asked him in preparation. Because I convinced myself she wasn't going to wake up, he had said. And I was wrong. And there is no version of what I did that I can make acceptable. The hearing was in January. The Honorable Claire Delaney had been on the bench for 22 years. She read everything. She asked precise questions. She listened to Daniel's attorney, explained the emotional context with the expression of a woman who has heard every variety of human explanation and knows the difference between a reason and an excuse. She ruled from the bench. The sale was invalid. The power of attorney had been used outside the scope of its authority. The transaction was fraudulent in its execution. The title company bore partial liability for failing to conduct adequate due diligence. She ordered the proceeds returned from escrow. She ordered Daniel to pay the difference between the sale price and the assessed value, plus legal fees. Then she looked at Daniel directly. The court finds that the defendant used a document of trust, granted by his mother for her protection. To conduct a transaction he believed she would never be alive to challenge. She paused. She let that sit in the room for a moment. The fact that she survived is not a mitigating circumstance. It is the reason we are here. This court does not take lightly the use of legal instruments to exploit the vulnerability of a person who was, at the time of the act, recovering from surgery performed for the defendant's benefit. Daniel sat at the defendant's table with his hands flat and his eyes down. The law exists, Judge Delaney said, precisely for moments like this one. Gloria and I sat in her car in the parking lot afterward. She had a thermos of coffee. She poured me a cup. February light, cold air, the particular quiet that follows a long thing being finished. He didn't appeal, she said. He could have. He chose not to. I looked out the windshield. I know, I said. She started the car and let it warm up for a minute. How do you feel? She asked. It was not a question Gloria asked often. She was not that kind of attorney. I thought about it honestly. Like I went somewhere very far away and came back to find everything rearranged, I said. And now I have to figure out where to put things. She nodded, pulled out of the parking lot. Go home, Teresa, she said. I went home on a Wednesday afternoon in February. Agnes drove me. We pulled up to the house on Millbrook Street, and it was exactly as it had always been. The buyer had not taken possession before the court order froze the transaction, and the house had simply waited. The estate sale sign was gone. The moving truck was gone. The house sat in the February light the same way it had always sat. I walked up the front path. The porch needed sweeping. The garden was bare, the way gardens are in February, dormant but there. Joseph's herb bed along the fence. I unlocked the door. It opened the same way it always opened, a little stiff on the left where it had always been stiff. I had been meaning to fix that since 2011. I stepped inside. I stood in the kitchen in my coat and looked at the morning light, though it was afternoon now. I was looking at where the morning light would be, the way you know a room so completely you can see it in times that aren't the current one. Joseph's coffee mug was still on the shelf. I sat down at the kitchen table. I sat there for a long time, and I did not cry, and I did not pray, and I did not speak to anyone living or dead. I just sat in the house that was mine, that had always been mine, that had almost been gone, and I breathed in and breathed out and let that be enough. Daniel came to see me in the spring. I had told him, through Renata, that I would see him when I was ready. He had waited without pushing. He came alone on a Saturday morning. I let him in. We sat in the living room, and he sat with his hands between his knees, not trying to arrange his face into anything, just sitting. "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me," he said. "Then what are you going to do?" I said. "I don't know," he said. "I came because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know where else to go." I looked at my son, 41 years old. A kidney that had been mine for 63 years keeping him alive. A house he had sold because he was certain I would not wake up. "Tell me what you told yourself," I said. "The exact story. Not the legal version, the one in your head." He was quiet for a moment. "I told myself you were going to die," he said. The doctors were. They weren't optimistic. "You're 63. The surgery is significant. There are risks." And I had been carrying this debt for 3 years, and I was so tired, Mom. I was so tired of being afraid. And I told myself, I convinced myself, that you weren't coming back. He stopped. And once I believed that, everything else followed. I told myself the house would just sit there, that the estate would take months to settle, that the creditors wouldn't wait. I told myself I was just getting ahead of something that was going to happen anyway. "But it wasn't going to happen anyway," I said. "I was going to wake up." "I know. You made a decision about my death before I was dead," I said. "You grieved me and made financial choices in that grief while I was still alive. While I was on a table giving you a piece of my body." He pressed his hands flat on his knees. "Yes," he said. "Daniel, I need you to understand something." I waited until he looked at me. "If I had died, you still would have been wrong. The house was not yours. My death would not have made it yours. You were wrong in the math, but you were also wrong in the act, even if I hadn't woken up." He nodded. Slowly, like a man absorbing something that was not new information, but was only now landing in the right place. "I would have helped you," I said, "with the debt, with the business. If you had come to me, even from the hospital bed, even the day before surgery, I would have helped you. You did not have to do this. You chose to do this instead of asking me." "I was ashamed," he said. "I know you were." I looked at him steadily. "Daniel, I carried you for 9 months and worked for 40 years and gave you a kidney, and I still wasn't someone you could come to when you were afraid." He broke then. Not the polished grief of a man performing. The real thing, the kind that makes a person look like they have been holding something for too long and have simply run out of the ability to hold it. I let him cry. I did not touch him, and I did not comfort him. Not because I was punishing him, because this was something he needed to go through rather than around, and I was not going to shorten it for him. When he was quieter, he looked up at me. "What now?" he said. "Now you go home and you tell Priscilla every true thing you have been hiding," I said. "Not to save your marriage. I don't know if your marriage can be saved, but because she deserves the truth. And then you find a legitimate way to address the debt. And then you come back here in 6 months and you knock on this door and you bring nothing but honesty. And then we find out what we are going to be," I said. "I don't know yet. I am not going to pretend I do." He nodded. "Mom," he said, "I am so sorry." "I know," I said, and I meant both things at once, that I believed him, and that it wasn't enough yet, and that yet was the most I could offer, and it was more than he had any right to expect. It is August now. Joseph's tomatoes are coming in. 2 plants, same as every summer. The herbs along the fence made it through the winter the way they always do, quietly, without anyone paying attention. I am slower than I was before the surgery. My left side carries the permanent fact of what it gave. I am aware of it the way you become aware of a scar, not as absence, but as history. A thing that happened, a choice that was made. Mine, not his. Daniel is in therapy. He called me to tell me in July, not as a bid for credit, but as information. He has told Priscilla everything. Their marriage is under strain in the specific way of a marriage that has been asked to hold something very heavy. I do not know if it will hold. I do not take responsibility for that. He made the choices that created that weight. He is the one who has to find out if the marriage is strong enough to carry it. He came to the house in late June. We sat on the porch. I brought out coffee. He asked about the garden, and I told him, and we talked about small things for an hour, and it was not the way it used to be between us, but it was not nothing either. Before he left, he stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at me and said, "I keep thinking about what you said, about being ashamed, about not being able to come to you. What about it? I want to understand when that happened, when I stopped being able to come to you with real things." I thought about it, honestly. "I think you stopped letting me see the hard things when you thought I had too many hard things of my own," I said. "After your father. After the mortgage. I think you decided I didn't need more weight. And you were trying to protect me. That is not an excuse," he said. "No," I said. "But it's where it started. And it's something you can fix. If you decide to." He nodded. Went to his car. Before he got in, he turned back. "The kidney," he said. "I want you to know I don't take it for granted. I think about it every single day." "Good," I said. "Think about what it cost, not the surgery. The 30 years before it." He nodded. He drove away. I sat on the porch with my coffee until the evening came in and the light shifted and the garden went quiet and the street was the same street it has always been, ordinary and entirely mine. Before I go tonight, I want to say something to you, not to everyone. To the one of you who is sitting somewhere with the specific grief of a person who has loved someone completely and discovered a limit in them they could not have imagined. The one of you who gave something enormous, your time, your health, your body, your savings, and woke up to find it had been accounted for in ways you did not authorize. I want to tell you this. Your love is not your liability. You are allowed to love someone and still hold them accountable. You are allowed to grieve who you believed they were and still require them to answer for who they turned out to be. Love is not a waiver. Motherhood is not a silence agreement. He thought I would not wake up. He was wrong. And I want you to hear what I did with that. I did not waste the fact of my survival. I did not fold it into forgiveness that cost him nothing. I hired a lawyer, and I stood in a courtroom, and I told the truth, and I let the law do what the law is built to do. And then I went home, to my house. My paid-off house with the east-facing kitchen and the herb bed along the fence. I gave my son a kidney because I wanted him to live. I took him to court because I refused to let him decide what my survival was worth. Both of those things were love. The first kind was the kind I had always known. The second kind was harder and more necessary, and I did not know I had it in me until I needed it. You have it in you too, I promise. My name is Teresa. I am 63 years old. I have 1 kidney and a paid-off house and a garden that is coming back in August light. I am still here. I intend to stay. Leave me 1 word in the comments if this found you when you needed it. Just 1. I read every single one. Subscribe. There are more stories. More women who survived things that should not have had to be survived. Every one of them has something to teach you about what is possible on the other side. Until next time, with everything I have left to give, Mom.